Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythvision.
All right, Bob. Next question. In the vein of the Pauline corpus, Richard Carrot, I believe you as well. You've pointed out that Paul's Christ is very much analogous to Philo's Logos. That Paul actually uses some of the same idioms, some of the same, the same ways of describing Christ as Philo does, his firstborn Son of God and so forth. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there are some very striking parallels but also some very notable distinctions between the kind of thing Philo is talking about and the kind of thing that Paul is talking about. I wondered if you could comment on both the similarities and the distinctions there.
Well, one thing that ought to be brought up is that Philo, though he allegorizes everything, as many of the rabbis did too, there were people that he argues against who said that since we understand the allegorical import of these laws, what they really meant, and this is an attempt to make them sound less arbitrary and silly. In fact, why were there such laws like dietary laws? You can eat this kind of locust, but not that. You can't eat bats or whatever, because I guess they prophetically knew about the Wuhan markets. You can't eat mice and so forth. Assimilated Jews who cared what Hellenists, Greeks, etc. thought about them, like in the Epistle of Aristeas said, yeah, I know it sounds ridiculous, it sounds arbitrary, and it kind of is, but the lawgivers stipulated these things so as to build a barrier between us and the pagans, so to make it harder for us to assimilate. If you can't share meals with them and so on, there's less likely to be influence and one rubbing off on the other. And this is exactly what anthropologists say. Yeah, of course, that was the point. That's what all of those rules were, to safeguard the body politic by safeguarding the human individual's body. You didn't want people to intermarry because that's going to be the end of Judaism if we don't stop it. And they're right. And so all the laws were to safeguard the integrity of the Jewish community. Well, there were some Jews in Alexandria, apparently, who said, now that we know the point of it, we don't need to keep them anymore. And Philo said, now wait just a second, that's going too far. This is right, they have this mystical meaning, but that doesn't mean you don't do it any longer. And this came up in Shiite Islam, where the Ismailis and others said that we're the Druze and so forth, that all of this stuff, like in Colossians, was shadow play. We know what it means now. We don't need it anymore. It's like training wheels on the bike. And others said, no, you can't do that. That's heresy. And so you can see why. Once you allegorize it and you say that's the really important truth, you're taking a big risk with the rest of it. Well, could Paul be understood as a person like that, who said we don't need the law, it was merely a shadow of the good things to come, which have come? It's like the fasting passage in Mark. Why don't you guys fast like the Baptists and the Pharisees do? And he says, well, you don't fast during the wedding reception. There's a time for it. And then the old clothes patched with new cloth, that's not going to work. When you pull them out of the dryer, they're going to be a pile of rags. Like, you can't put new wine into old wineskins. That sort of implies, or the most acute version of that's in the Gospel of Thomas. What dietary laws should we follow? Should we fast? Should we give alms? And Jesus says, shockingly, if you pray, you will be damned. If you give alms, you will imperil your spirit, and so forth. What? Well, because those are preparatory penances you do to make sure you're repenting before the end. Hey, the kingdom of God has already come, but you will never even recognize that if you continue with business as usual. You don't need to prepare anymore. It's like anorexia nervosa. You're already thin as a rail, but you can't see it. And so you, like Karen Carpenter, you starve yourself to death. Well, so that you can see that tendency in early Christianity. And that, I think, is a battle Philo is fighting too. Especially since, well, let's leave it at that, and then say that the big difference between between Philo's logos, or logoi, actually, he had several different stages of the reason of God, bridging the gap between God and creation. The big difference between that and Pauline or Johannine Christology is that Philo seems to have thought that the Logos was the real identity of the Genesis patriarchs in the Bible, that's what those characters were being used to teach you about wisdom in various combinations. But Philo no doubt thought that those guys really existed, and that he is saying, however, as a text, it has a deeper meaning, and that's what I'm talking about. Well, he didn't, we think, mean to say that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were actually incarnations of the Logos. But I don't think it's a very big step to take the Jesus character and say, well, yeah, he existed and he was the divine wisdom come to earth. Like G.A. Wells used to say, there's this myth of the descent, rejection, and reascent of Lady Wisdom, who hoped to teach wisdom to the stupid mortals, but they had better things to do. Now, the Super Bowl's on. I'd rather watch that. So she says, okay, I give up. And she goes to heaven, where she gets the welcome denied on earth. And Wells says, does this strike a familiar note? And he was, that was his unique approach, that it was wisdom Christology that was historicized. And that could be, and that's kind of how you could go from Philonic thought to the New Testament Christology. It's just that we don't know how common Philo's views were, so do we mean they actually read Philo, which they might have, or that these ideas were possessed by many different groups? I think it was Gordon Ryland in a book called The Origins of Gnostic Christianity, who goes into these matters and shows how there were other groups, including the Naassenes, who had the Logos and called it the Son of Man, and things that are also pretty close parallels. And so it could be the larger Logos movement of which Philo is a part. And of all people, the maligned Hugh Schoenfield, author of The Passover Plot, he, in a book called Those Incredible Christians, explored this and showed how close all of that stuff is to the Kabbalah. And we know elements of that were pre-Christian, because they appear in the Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth. That's a readily available, not too arcane book that I'm sure you can still get a hold of, that's worth looking at. But the whole idea of the Logos and all those titles shared with Jesus, that I think you got a hard time explaining that away. And I think James Dunn sort of chickens out on that too. And he says, oh, Philo didn't really mean it, but the New Testament authors did.
Join our Patreon.